The day he stopped explaining himself, the world didn't clap. Nobody stood up. Nobody said, "I understand now." Instead, the silence got louder. For years, his life felt like a never-ending interview. Every decision questioned, every pause analyzed, every mistake replayed by people who had never walked a single mile in his shoes. And he kept answering, not because he owed them answers, but because he was scared of the space that silence would create. He grew up learning one dangerous lesson early. If you don't explain yourself, people will decide who you are for you, and those decisions are rarely kind. So he learned to speak before being asked, to defend before being attacked, to apologize even when he wasn't wrong. He explained why he was quiet. He explained why he worked so hard. He explained why he didn't celebrate small wins. He explained why he was tired all the time. What nobody saw was how heavy those explanations were. Each one was like carrying a brick. One brick didn't hurt. 10 bricks felt uncomfortable. 100 bricks? They crushed him. There were moments when he would replay conversations in his head long after they ended, wondering if he said too much or not enough, wondering if that explanation sounded weak, wondering if he should send another message to clear things up. Clear things up. That phrase haunted him, because things were never clear, not really. Some people listened only to respond. Some listened only to judge. Some listened only to use his words against him later. And still, he kept explaining, because explaining felt safer than being misunderstood. Explaining felt safer than being alone. But safety has a cost. Slowly, he started losing respect, not from others first, but from himself. Every time he over-explained, he felt smaller. Every time he justified his existence, something inside him whispered, "Why do you need permission to live your life?" That whisper grew louder over time. He noticed how confident people rarely explained themselves. They didn't rush, they didn't panic, they didn't hand out reasons like apology letters. They made decisions and stood by them. That observation disturbed him, because deep down he knew the truth. He wasn't explaining because he was kind. He was explaining because he doubted himself. There was a breaking point. There always is. Not a dramatic explosion, not a loud argument, just exhaustion. He had just finished explaining his choices again, this time to someone who didn't even bother hiding their boredom. Mid-sentence, he saw it. The distant eyes, the polite nod, the silent judgment. And something inside him collapsed. He realized he could speak for another hour, another day, another year, and it still wouldn't change how that person saw him. That's when it hit him. Explanations don't change minds. They only reveal insecurities. That night, he sat alone, staring at nothing. No phone, no noise, just him and his thoughts. A rare and uncomfortable meeting. He asked himself a question he had been avoiding for years. What if I stop? What if I stop trying to be understood by everyone? What if I stop explaining my pain to people who've never earned the right to hear it? What if I let silence do the talking? The idea terrified him, because silence meant losing control. Silence meant being judged without defense. Silence meant standing naked in front of opinions. But silence also meant freedom. The next opportunity came sooner than expected. Someone questioned him again, same tone, same entitlement, waiting for him to unpack his entire life like evidence. His heart started racing, muscle memory. The old him woke up, ready to perform. And then he stopped. He felt the urge rise and let it pass. He looked at them and said calmly, "I'm okay with my decision." No explanation, no justification, no emotional defense, just truth. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, thick, awkward, but for the first time, not painful. That moment was small, but it was powerful, because it wasn't about them, it was about him choosing himself.
That choice changed how he walked into rooms, changed how he spoke, changed how he listened. People started reacting differently. Some became distant. When you stop explaining yourself, people who relied on your self-doubt lose access. They feel it immediately, and they don't like it. Some tried to guilt him. "Why are you so quiet now? You've changed. You used to explain things better." What they really meant was, you used to be easier to control. Others tested boundaries, pushed buttons, made comments meant to pull explanations out of him. But he stayed calm, and calm is dangerous, because calm shows strength without aggression. Calm shows confidence without noise. Calm says, "I know who I am, whether you do or not." Over time, something unexpected happened. The right people stayed. They didn't demand explanations. They didn't interrogate his choices. They respected his pace. And for the first time in his life, relationships felt light. He learned something critical in that season. You don't lose people when you stop explaining yourself. You lose illusions. Illusions of connection, illusions of support, illusions of understanding. And losing illusions hurts, but it heals. He began protecting his energy like it mattered, because it did. He stopped giving his story to people who only wanted entertainment. He stopped explaining his goals to people who felt threatened by ambition. He understood now. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Some things are meant to be left unsaid. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you give people a choice: respect you as you are, or walk away. And either way, you win. The day he stopped explaining himself, he didn't become silent. He became solid, unshakable, rooted. And once you reach that place, no explanation can ever be more powerful than your presence.
Silence didn't fix everything overnight. That's the part nobody talks about. When he stopped explaining himself, he also stopped being saved by noise. There were no quick validations anymore. No instant relief from someone saying, "Oh, okay, now I get it." Instead, there were long pauses, long walks, long nights where his thoughts felt louder than ever. Because when you remove explanations, you remove distractions. And what's left is you. There were moments he questioned himself. Late at night, when the world slept and doubt woke up, a voice whispered, "What if they're right? What if you should explain more? What if silence makes you look wrong?" That voice sounded convincing. It always does when you're alone. He realized something brutal in that phase. Explaining yourself often isn't for others, it's for your own anxiety. It's a way to calm the fear of rejection, a way to feel temporarily safe. And safety is addictive. Without explanations, he had to sit with discomfort, with misunderstanding, with the idea that some people would never see his side of the story. That was terrifying. There were days he wanted to break, to send that long message, to clarify, to defend, to fix how someone saw him. But then he remembered something important. Every time he explained himself in the past, he didn't feel stronger after. He felt emptier. So he stayed quiet, and quiet became a mirror. In that mirror, he saw patterns he had ignored his whole life. How often he tried to earn love. How often he confused being understood with being valued. How often he allowed people to interrogate his choices just because they were louder. He saw how many times he shrank himself so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And that realization hurt more than any misunderstanding ever could. There was a season where loneliness hit hard, not because people disappeared, but because conversations changed. They became shorter, less emotional, less dramatic. At first, that felt like loss, but slowly he understood. Peace feels empty when you're addicted to chaos. He wasn't missing people, he was missing intensity. He was missing the emotional roller coaster of defending himself, explaining himself, proving himself. And letting go of that addiction felt like withdrawal.
There were moments he wondered if he had become cold, distant, detached, but then he checked his heart. He still cared. He still felt deeply. He just stopped bleeding in front of people who enjoyed watching him bleed. That's when strength started forming quietly. Not the loud kind, not the aggressive kind, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. He noticed how differently he handled criticism now. Before, criticism felt like an attack that demanded explanation. Now, it felt like information. If it was useful, he kept it. If it wasn't, he let it pass. No emotional defense, no overthinking, no rehearsing arguments in his head. Just calm evaluation. That calm scared some people, because people who rely on control hate unpredictability. And nothing is more unpredictable than someone who doesn't react. Some tried to provoke emotions. Some exaggerated situations. Some questioned his silence loudly. But silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. It's power. He started understanding a deeper truth. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. The most defensive person is rarely the most confident. And the one who explains the least often knows the most. Slowly, his focus shifted inward. He stopped wasting energy correcting narratives that didn't matter. Instead, he invested that energy into building a life that didn't require explanation. He worked quietly. He healed privately. He planned without announcing. And results started showing. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. People who once questioned him started observing him instead. Some stayed silent. Some grew curious. Some felt threatened. Because nothing confuses people more than consistency without explanation. He didn't tell people how hard it was. He didn't tell people what he sacrificed. He didn't tell people what it cost him emotionally. He let outcomes speak. And outcomes don't stutter. There was a moment months later when someone from his past confronted him, someone who used to demand explanations, someone who used to question every move he made. They said, "You're different now." He paused. Old him would have asked, how? Old him would have explained the journey, but not anymore. He simply said, "I grew," and that was enough. In that moment, he realized the biggest shift wasn't external. It was internal. He no longer needed to be understood by everyone. He needed to be aligned with himself. And alignment is rare. Alignment means you can sleep at night even when misunderstood. Alignment means you can walk alone without feeling abandoned. Alignment means you trust your inner compass more than public opinion. That kind of trust takes time, pain, discipline. But once you have it, you never beg for understanding again. He learned that explaining yourself to the wrong people is a form of self-betrayal, and loyalty to yourself sometimes looks like silence. The world didn't become kinder, but he became stronger, and that changed everything.
He started remembering things he hadn't thought about in years. Moments from childhood, small moments, the kind people dismiss, but those moments build a person. He remembered being corrected mid-sentence. "Say it properly. Explain what you mean. That doesn't make sense." He remembered how approval came only after justification, how love felt conditional, how silence was misunderstood as guilt. So he learned early, if you want to be safe, explain yourself. That lesson followed him everywhere. At school, he explained why he didn't speak much. At work, he explained why he needed time. In relationships, he explained his feelings until they lost meaning. Explaining became armor, and armor, when worn too long, becomes a cage. Once he saw the pattern, he couldn't unsee it. He wasn't just explaining decisions, he was explaining his worth. And that realization hit hard, because worth is not something you explain, worth is something you embody. There was grief in that understanding, grief for all the times he abandoned himself just to be accepted, grief for all the energy wasted trying to control how others saw him. He had to forgive his younger self, the one who didn't know better, the one who thought love had to be earned through clarity and compliance. Forgiveness wasn't loud, it was quiet, private, necessary. As weeks turned into months, silence stopped feeling like resistance and started feeling like identity. He noticed how people spoke differently around him now, less careless, less intrusive, as if they sensed something had shifted. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you force people to meet you where you stand, not where they want to place you. Some still misunderstood him. Some assumed stories. Some filled gaps with their own insecurities. And for the first time, he let them. That was the hardest part, letting people be wrong about you. Not correcting, not defending, not clarifying, just letting it be. And strangely, nothing broke. His life didn't collapse, his world didn't end, the sky didn't fall. What ended was the constant tension. He realized something powerful in that calm. Most people don't want the truth, they want confirmation. And no amount of explanation can satisfy someone who's already decided what to believe. That understanding freed him. He stopped trying to manage perceptions, stopped editing himself for comfort, stopped explaining growth to people who were committed to misunderstanding change. And in that freedom, he found direction. He started trusting his instincts again, making decisions faster, standing by them longer, not because he was stubborn, but because he was clear. Clarity changes posture. Clarity changes tone. Clarity changes presence. People could feel it before he spoke. He wasn't intimidating, he was grounded. There's a difference. Intimidation demands fear. Groundedness demands respect. He noticed that when he did speak now, people listened more, because words spoken rarely carry weight. Words spoken constantly lose value. Silence refined his voice. Then came the moment that truly sealed it. A situation that once would have destroyed him emotionally. Accusations, misinterpretations, side conversations. The kind of storm that used to pull long explanations out of him like a reflex. This time, he felt the urge rise, and then pass. He chose dignity over defense. He said nothing beyond what was necessary. No emotional monologue, no evidence presentation, no desperate clarity. Just facts and peace. And something shocking happened. The storm burned itself out, because drama needs fuel, and explanations are fuel. Without his energy feeding it, the chaos collapsed under its own weight. That's when he fully understood. Silence doesn't invite chaos, it exposes it. From that day on, he stopped fearing misunderstanding. He understood that being misunderstood by the wrong people is often a sign you're finally doing something right. He also understood this truth most people learn too late. You don't owe everyone access to your inner world. You don't owe everyone clarity. You don't owe everyone your reasons. You owe yourself peace. The day he stopped explaining himself, he didn't become invisible, he became undeniable. Not because people suddenly understood him, but because he understood himself. And when that happens, the world adjusts. Quietly, slowly, inevitably. And then one morning, he realized something he had never truly understood before. The world had not changed. People had not changed. Opinions, judgments, misunderstandings, they were all still there. But he had changed. He woke up and felt it in his bones. That heavy, anxious weight of needing permission to exist was gone. He no longer rehearsed explanations in his head before speaking. He no longer flinched when someone questioned him. He no longer measured his words to make others comfortable. He simply was. And in that being, he found power. The kind of power that doesn't shout, that doesn't demand attention, that doesn't need applause. It's quiet, invisible, undeniable. It comes from knowing that you are enough, even when nobody else understands.
He thought about all the times he had explained himself in the past, how he had stretched himself thin trying to fit into everyone else's world, how he had begged, subtly or openly, for acceptance, validation, respect, how he had lost moments, opportunities, even happiness because he feared silence more than he feared being misunderstood. And he realized the truth that few ever discover. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving away pieces of your soul. When you stop justifying your existence, you take back the life that was always yours to begin with. When you stop feeding the chaos of other people's opinions, the storm around you finally settles and clarity emerges. He remembered the people who had left when he became quiet, and he smiled, because they were never meant to stay. The people who truly mattered, the ones who respected him, trusted him, and valued him, never needed explanations. They stayed. And those relationships, rooted in understanding without constant clarification, grew stronger than ever. He thought about the voice in his head, the one that used to panic whenever someone questioned him. That voice had no place anymore. Silence didn't scare him, it protected him. It refined him. It showed him who he was without the noise of the world dictating his value. He walked through his life differently now. He didn't avoid challenges, but he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He didn't seek approval, but he didn't need recognition. He didn't shout his victories, and he didn't dramatize his struggles. Everything he did for one person, himself. And that, he realized, was the ultimate freedom. Because here's the cruel irony most people never see. The more you try to explain yourself, the more people judge you. The more you fight to be understood, the more power you give to misunderstanding. The more you justify your life, the less life you actually live. The day he stopped explaining himself, he didn't just gain peace. He gained clarity. He gained dignity. He gained strength. He gained the ability to stand tall even when the world whispered against him, because the voice that mattered most was inside him, and it had been listening all along. He understood now that being misunderstood is not a failure. Being unaccepted by those who don't see your worth is not a loss. What matters is alignment with your own soul, courage to stand by your choices, and the willingness to walk alone when necessary. And in that alignment, he found something more valuable than explanation, more powerful than approval, more transformative than validation. He found himself. He had been living to be understood by others. Now, he lived to be understood by one person, himself. And with that understanding, everything changed. Because when you stop explaining yourself, the world doesn't bend to you, but you finally stop bending to the world. And that is the beginning of everything you were always meant to become. Silence had given him everything. And he smiled, finally free.